Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Graft Concept podcast. Today I'm with Carolyn Tipper, who was reluctant to give me a job title, but she's since mentioned she's an executive leadership coach and founder of See the Solution. So Carolyn, I know you work with people who are keen to make improvements in life and their career. So can you just sort of summarise some of the common things that you come up against with the people that you work with?
Yeah, hi Chris, thank you for having me on. That makes me sound like a little bit of a stickler, doesn't it? I was reluctant to give you a job title, mainly because what does a job title mean a lot of the time? More important about what we try to do, I suppose. So what I do is work with leaders within businesses, quite often CEOs, MDs, heads of, directors. They usually connect with me when they're wanting to work with a senior leadership team on either their leadership approach or strategy, or those leaders are just wanting some personal development to help them be more accomplished leaders within the businesses that they're in.
And is there I imagine it's quite a diverse range of people that you work with, but are there any sort of common themes with your clients?
Yeah, very common really, which relate a lot to my previous experience. So previous to being the founder of See the Solution, I worked as director within some organisations, and previous to that I worked as a HR professional, and previous to that as a leader. And some of the common themes that I saw through all those years are playing out still now within the people that I coach, which tells me there's still an awful lot of work to do. Some of those themes, big one is capacity. And when I talk about capacity, it's not necessarily just time. That can be people's energy. It can be their thinking time as well. Another one is about people understanding themselves. Quite often they're stuck or they're struggling because they don't fully understand themselves. If they don't understand themselves, they don't really know how to manage themselves. And then that's connected to not really understanding other people as well as they could do. And equally, if you don't understand other people, it's tricky to actually have a really, really great relationship with them. Another couple that would be common ones that people probably come across are not having really clear boundaries. So as a leader, if you've not got really strong and clear boundaries, that's going to also affect your relationships and affect your capacity. And an interesting one, which is especially as people start to move up their leadership career ladder, is not letting go of what they were previously great at. So they're still wanting to step back into the things that they were great at before, which quite often is the things that we're managing or the things that we're doing, rather than necessarily the leadership role that they've got now. And that's because sometimes it's a safe place. They know it, they're familiar with it, it's easier to do things sometimes themselves. That not letting go of what you were previously good at to step into the role that you're now in is quite a common theme that I see with different leaders. And I guess I could go into those a little bit more, but those are just the common themes that I find.
There's a couple that stand out there. That last point that you made is something that I really resonate with sort of throughout my career. It's difficult, isn't it? Because you establish yourself in a role as being able to do something and sort of add to a team or a business in that capacity. And then as you move on, you're sort of in this weird transition period where there's probably not somebody to necessarily fill that void straight away. So you default sometimes to doing that. And then as a result, you starve yourself of the time that you need to do the new role. So that's definitely something that I've come up against. Another one you mentioned was understanding yourself. I think that's such a big part of personal development, isn't it? And the bit which I feel it took me the longest to get my head around, and limits progress until you can actually sort of get around that. So what are some of the key things that you talk about with your clients around sort of starting to understand themselves a little bit better and how they can apply that to their personal development?
Often when I'm working with the level of leaders and where they've got to in their career when they've sought out coaching, they've already they've already got some really great skills around leadership. They're already good leaders, and they're already usually self-aware. The fact that they're putting themselves in a position to go and work with a coach, and knowing that that's going to mean that they're going to have to, really open themselves up. They've got a really good sense of self-awareness already. What they've necessarily not done for some time, which you quite often do in the early part of your career, is actually learn about themselves. Because quite often new leaders will do that; they'll learn about themselves. But when you've been doing it for many years, you might stop doing that. And so, understanding yourself is basically saying, let's learn about myself more. Let's continue to learn about myself. And I use lots of different models and exercises so that they start to look at where their strengths are, what their brand is, what filters have they got going on for themselves, what are their triggers, or what are their values, all the things that sort of help you to go, all right, okay, I can see why I'm thinking that way, and if I can see why I'm thinking that way, I know why I'm feeling that way, and therefore I know and understand why I'm going to behave in the way that I'm behaving. And by doing that, you can almost start to go, well, I'm going to teach myself, now I've got that understanding, I'm going to teach myself to think in a way that is more useful for me and for the people that I'm leading. And I mean, I'm going to manage then how I'm thinking and feeling, and everything that all the behaviour that we do comes from those two things, how we're thinking and how we're feeling. So I often hear people say you can't help the way you feel. Well, you actually can, because we feel as a result of the thoughts that we're having. So if you understand your own thoughts and why you have them, and you start to make decisions about thoughts that you want to have and the way that you want to think, you can actually influence how you're going to feel and how you're going to behave. And it's the minute a leader starts to go, right, okay, if I can influence that, if I understand myself better and why I'm thinking currently the way I am, and realise how I want to think, then actually suddenly you've got this superpower in understanding and managing yourself. And there's something that we might move on to talk about. It's called the communication model in neuro-linguistic programming, and it's what goes on in here. So we've got goes in our heads. So we see something happens externally, the whole chunk of stuff happens in our heads, and then we behave. And the communication model unpicks all that stuff that goes on in our heads, and helps us to understand what's going on for ourselves. And it sounds like really complicated stuff, but it's not, because we use very simple, dead easy techniques for people to start understanding what's going on inside their head, and how they can manage it once they understand it. And it's quite powerful, but it's very much based on neuro-linguistic programming.
Okay. Does that differ then from some of the assessments that I've used myself, so like the MBTI and like the Clifton Strengths assessments? Are they things that you use, or is that sort of a different approach?
Yeah, and there's lots out there. There's StrengthsFinder, Myers-Briggs, Core Strengths, Insights, Coloured Thinking. There's a plethora of things that you can use, and they're based on 4 things. They're based on energies. They're based on physical, intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and all of them are. They're based on those things. But what people do is they put them into something where you can do a questionnaire, and out of that you get some findings, and then you've got some common stuff that you can use. So some of it is based on that. But the communication model from NLP is not about putting you in a box with a lot of other people, which some of those things are. And they're hugely, hugely useful to put you in a box and understand what that box means, and put other people in boxes and understand what they mean. But what the communication model is, doesn't put you in a box. It deals with you individually. So it's everything that's going on in your world and how you view the world based on what's been going on for you in the past. And it's very easy when I talk to people about, we call them filters, and it's almost like, I say it's like going to for anybody who wears glasses and they've been for an eye test, or if you don't wear glasses and you've been for an eye test, and the optician puts these little lenses in your glasses. They put these funny things on, and then they drop lenses into these frames, and they ask you how it looks, better or worse, depending on these ones they drop in. And what I say the communication model is about these filters that all through your life are dropping into these glasses based on your experiences, your belief, your upbringing, your faith, your own purpose, your own agenda, your fears, your dreams, your wishes. All these things are little filters, and they're in there, and they affect everything that we do. Everything we do, these filters drop in. So we've all got a completely different view of the world. There's 7 billion people on the planet. There's 7 billion different views of the world, because every one of those filters is individual to that person. And what I get people to do is understand what their filters are. And if they understand what they are, they understand why they're thinking in the way that they are. They understand why they're then feeling and why they're behaving. And then you start to wind that back. And how can you manage it? It sounds really tricky, but it's really not. And it'd be interesting, when I do an exercise, which doesn't take me very long to do with my clients, they grasp it really quickly, and then it becomes a common tool that they can use quite easily.
Yeah. No, they're definitely interesting, those things, aren't they? I found the most recent one that I did with my employer was the Clifton Strengths one, and that was quite an interesting take, because as opposed to like focusing on weaknesses, it really identifies strengths, and it was quite, I guess, eye-opening for me to sort of approach it that way. Whereas previously I'd sought to sort of become better in my role, or a better leader, and I needed to be really rounded on like loads of different things and sort of tick all the boxes. But that approach is sort of really about finding out sort of what the top 5 things you were good at, and then utilising those as to how you can fit into a team to make sort of a team performance better. So yeah, they're also like nuanced, aren't they, and different, but I think there's probably something good you can take from every one, and perhaps you don't want to do every single one because you'll be overloaded by information, but I can imagine that there's loads of different approaches that lead to good outcomes there. So that's sort of the understanding yourself bit. Then how's that lead on to understanding others better?
Yeah, and you're right. Those things that you talk about that help you, those tools that you can do, those exercises that you can do, help you understand yourself. They also at the same time, if you're doing them in a team, it gives you an idea of somebody else and what their strengths are. And you're absolutely right. We too often in our careers are asked to think about how we can develop and look at our, what are your weaknesses? It's a common question when you have an interview, isn't it? What your weaknesses? But actually, if you're always thinking about how you can bring your strengths, and not necessarily, if you've got a weakness that's hindering you in your role, or hindering doing something you want to achieve, then you're going to want to come to a certain extent capable at it. But actually, let's really take your strengths, and that's what you bring. I call it bringing your superpowers, bringing your brand. I do this stuff called a brand exercise with a lot of my clients, and we go, once you understand your brand, once you understand your superpowers, you can bring those to great benefit, and you're not really worrying quite so much about the things that aren't your strengths. Also, it's about going, when I haven't got those things that I might need, who can I go to? So this exercise you're talking about, if you know the rest of your team or your colleagues or your peers have a certain strength that you haven't got, then you can go to that person for that help. You can bring that person in. So having that familiarity that you've said through those exercises, or through the understanding that I was talking about understanding your filters and also understanding others, then you can draw on that. If you didn't do the exercise, you wouldn't necessarily know. So yeah, it definitely helps in bringing others in for where you need others' strength.
Yeah, it's it's just like, it's so obvious when you think about it, isn't it? But doing that exercise just made me think, oh yeah, like, why wouldn't we do it that way? But
Yeah.
I guess you don't know what you don't know, do you? It's one of those, it's like silly things, you get entrenched in doing things a certain way, and It's not until you take a bit of time to step back that you realise different approach to doing it. So
I think,
something else you touched on. Sorry, go on.
yeah, I think sometimes we do, there's a danger of doing those exercises and then just going, right, I know what box I'm in now and I know what box somebody else is in. And I always say that's great, but it doesn't mean anything unless you're actually going to use that information in some way. So it's a bit like getting a diagnosis of something and then going, well, now I've got a diagnosis, my problem's over. Actually, it's what you do with that diagnosis that is actually the real. And it's when you find out you've got a particular personality trait through one of those exercises, it's now what are you going to do with that? How are you going to use your strengths? How are you going to use knowing yourself and understanding yourself? So I always say, understanding yourself is the first bit. Managing yourself is the powerful bit. And you want to go, right, I'm great at something. How am I going to use that? How am I going to dial that up to benefit me and other people around me? Equally, I know something about somebody else now. How am I going to bring that in to help me and to help the other people in the business that I'm in? So it is a thing I sometimes come across when I work with leaders who've done exercises. It's almost a case I've got my badge now, but actually it's doing something with it that is the only real purpose when it comes down to it.
Yeah, something you touched on in that sort of just before we came on to those assessments was like people that were feeling stuck. How would you explain that feeling of being stuck?
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of what my clients say to me all the time. Really, they use words that would make me feel like they were feeling overwhelmed. They often say, "I don't know what next step to take. I need some guarantees before I can move forward, or some safety net before I can move forward from the position that they're currently in, particularly if it's, making a career change or trying to go forward with a particular decision that they've made for themselves or for the teams or for the life." I often hear people say, "I'm not ready," and I'm like, "Well, what does ready look like? Do you have to be the finished article before you go and do something?" They want to know they want certainty of the outcome before. So I often say it's they're attached to the outcome. So rather than going, I'm going to measure myself by the steps that I'm taking, I'm feeling like I'm going to have to measure myself by the outcome. And none of us really know what an outcome is going to be. We can have the best plan in the world with all the really well thought out steps, but the outcome is not guaranteed. So if you attach to the outcome too much, almost like you have to know the outcome is guaranteed before you start to take those steps, that is what can stop me taking the first step. So it's very much pulling away all those fears are going, those filters again. What are all those filters that are going on for you that's stopping you from just going, I've got something I want to do, and if I take the first step, it doesn't mean to say I have to take the 5th or the 10th step or the 20th step. It's just the first step. I might decide by step 3 I don't want to walk this path anymore, or I might decide actually getting to step 3 has made me realise I want to actually take a slight sort of 180 turn on this and go down a different path. So quite often those are the things. That's the narrative that I hear going on in people's heads when they're talking to me.
Yeah, it's definitely something I felt probably a few years ago now, but yeah, just felt a bit, I guess, like rudderless and not sure which direction to sort of go in. I often think back to what was going through my mind in that time. I think it was just, yeah, maybe a fear of like making the wrong decision or not taking a chance. And I think a lot of those sort of things that you gave as examples there are probably led by fear, aren't they? I think from experience, personal experience, the only way you can do that is do what you said. So to get over it, you've just got to take those sort of initial steps, haven't you? There's no way to sort of shortcut or jump through a way to get through it quickly. You've just got to make them first steps and keep building on it, haven't you?
Yeah. An example I get sometimes when people are, some of the people that I coach are thinking about, making some sort of change in their life, or an example might be a change of job role or something like that. And they'll say to me, but I don't know whether it's the job I really want. I don't know whether it's the organisation I really want. That's what I mean about being attached to the outcome. They're never going to know whether that's the job they really want or it's the organisation they really want. They're never going to know until they're in it. And when they're in it, the only reason why they're going to know is because they've got some more information, because they're in it. And they can't make a decision earlier on down the road because they haven't got that information. And we often try and live our world in hindsight. We want answers to things that we can't have until we're actually further down that road. And I often say to them, well, when you decide you want to apply, what's the first step? Well, the first step is to apply. And when you decide to apply, you're not making the decision to step into that job there and then. You'll make a decision to apply, that's all. And then you'll apply. If you're successful, then you might have another decision to make. Do I want to go for an interview? And you'll get some more information at that interview that might help you decide whether it's still something that you want to do. So there's an element of you'll make decisions along the way, and because you'll have more information along the way. And that's what I say about people almost wanting all the information before they start. And they can't have all the information because they've got to start moving down that path before they have it. And equally, they want to know what the outcome's going to be before they start, and you can't. And if you can let go of some of that, you can let go of being attached to the outcome, or let go of the fact that you cannot possibly have all the information at this time, but you will get more at a later date, then it sort of helps you to relax a little bit about it and removes a bit of the pressure that you're putting on yourself, or if it's fear, remove some of the fear as well.
I guess it comes back to what you said about understanding yourself, doesn't it, as well? If you've got a really clear idea of what your values are, where you want to go with a role, where you can add value to an organisation, you can start making informed steps towards that, can't you, based on the work that you've done as to sort of understanding yourself. Where if you've not done that first step, you probably end up in the position where I felt I was a few years ago, and you just sort of making decisions ad hoc, and it's not actually getting you anywhere. You're just making a load of random decisions.
Yeah.
So, what are some of there's some of the feelings that people have when they might sort of describe themselves feeling stuck. In reality, what are the barriers to them making progress? Is a lot of it just sort of internal or sort of mental things that challenges that people need to overcome, or what are some of the physical things like in the workplace people might come up against that might be a barrier to progress that you help them navigate?
So you mentioned a couple of things there. You said, is it internal? And I guess is it internal or is it external? So we are, we have a lot of personality traits that come from when we're very young, and we adapt them to help us navigate. One of them is we have internal filters going on, internal referencing, and we have external referencing, and both of those things. Now, you find that somebody will be quite heavily rooted in one or the other. So you get somebody who's extremely externally referenced or extremely internally referenced, or a bit of both. And when somebody's externally referenced, they're going to be, when they're wanting to make a decision, when they're stuck, they probably talk to a lot of people. They go and ask for a lot of advice. They'll go and share their thoughts with a lot of people, and I guess solicit lots of opinions, and that will be something that might help them. And if you're quite internally focused, then you might go and look at a lot of data. You might do a lot of thinking, a lot of reflection, look for a lot of evidence and that type of thing. So externally people are generally looking for experience and advice, and internally referenced people quite often are looking for data that they can process themselves. So it's worth knowing what your influences are, and knowing how much of effect and where can you go and get that from if you need it, and that's what you need to help. Because sometimes that's all you need to give you that strength to do it. Whether it's data to evidence to yourself, or whether it's external encouragement or other people's experiences. Both of those are quite common influences. And there's also, I guess I think about your narrative. So the things that will stop people going and doing it are those past experiences that you've had. So I'll often get people going into a situation. It might not necessarily be a decision, but they're going into a situation, and before they go into it, they've already got themselves a list of the things that they believe are going to happen. And none of that stuff may be true, but it's based on what's happened to them in the past. So last time I stepped into this situation, X, Y, and Z happened. Therefore, when I step into it again, X, Y, and Z will happen. Now, we take on experiences from the past to keep us safe. You know, if I don't stop when I'm crossing the road, I'm going to get knocked down. So experience tells me that I don't do that. If I put my hand in that fire, it's going to hurt. So my experience tells me I don't do that again. So they're there to keep us safe. However, they also keep us stuck. So the bit then is how do you keep yourself safe, but at the same time, don't use the past to keep yourself stuck. And that's about, okay, I've learned from last time, so I'm not going to do exactly the same thing as I did last time. I'm still going to do it, but I'm going to do it in a different way with more information and more knowledge. If that explains or answers your question,
Yeah. So, you were mentioning there about like being sort of internally or externally driven. Is there an argument to sort of say if you know you're externally driven that you might be better off taking some sort of like internal or data-led approaches or vice versa? Or is it better to stick to one side or the other?
So, like anything that we are, even when you talked about those sort of strength finder questionnaires, and it goes, right, this is your strength, that's great. That strength will work for you, but there's times when that might work against you. Whichever one you are, there's times when it will work for you and there's times when it will work against you. It's understanding when that is exactly the same with internal and external referencing. There's times when being one or the other will work for you and there's times when it will be against you. It's being aware of that. So when you are externally referenced and you go and you solicit advice from other people and you're listening to what they're saying, that's great when you're wanting to get power and encouragement behind something you want to do, and your inner belief is not very high and you're going to boost that by other people encouraging you. But actually, also it can leave you very much blowing in the wind. So that person says one thing, that one says another, that one says another, and you're almost, where do I go? Who do I believe? I've got lots of conflicting information. So that's where it can work against you, and that's when you might go, okay, I've got quite a number of sets of opinions here. Let's go away and now reflect on that. Perhaps find some stuff for myself that will help me make sense of it. And you might at that point go, well, that information really makes clear that bit of opinion I've got, but actually it discounts that bit of opinion I've got. So it can work for you against it. Internally is the same. If you've got a very strong internal narrative that is really not strong and it's telling you that you really don't feel comfortable doing something, and no matter how much somebody else can see your strengths and can see that you'd be great at it, you're going to always have that battle with your internal stuff. In some way you're going to have to silence that internal narrative. And that way is probably going to find some evidence, because just somebody else saying it is not enough for you. So you're going to have to find some data that will give you something that makes you feel, right, yeah, I can convince myself here. Equally, it's a great, powerful thing to be internal. If you're determined, and no matter what anybody else says, however many people might say you're not going to be any good at that, you're not going to succeed, and you go, yeah, I am. I know exactly what I'm doing here. 10 people can tell me I'm not, but I know I am. It can be a huge thing to power through. And you hear that of people, really successful people sometimes in the past, athletes in particular, when they say people kept telling me I couldn't do this and I just knew I could, and they achieved great things. So like anything, it's knowing when it works against you and when it works for you, and then what techniques have you got to make sure you made the best of those things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's you can definitely overwhelm yourself, can't you, or take too much on. I think if you're not careful.
Yeah,
So
I can be quite externally focused, but I can be internally. So I am I am internally focused, internally referenced. I will generally make a good, reasonable decision on what I want to do. What I tend to do a little bit more is go and test it out when I'm not absolutely sure. If I'm really sure, I'm a bit like, I'm sure, I'm going, I'm off, I'm out the blocks. If I'm just a little bit like that, I'll go, right, I'll test it out a little bit, but I perhaps only test the bits out that I want to. I'm like, I'm solid on that, I'll just test these little bits out, but I'm quite internally focused, so internally referenced. And that stops me almost being blown in the wind by a load of different opinions. It can also have its downsides. You could miss some really valuable information that somebody else has got to give you. So again, it's equally. And I know some people who are very externally referenced, and they will, but before they even think about making a decision, they'll go out and they'll talk to lots of different people, gather that information, take that back, assimilate it, and then make the decision. There really isn't a right or wrong, but it's important to know yours and then how it works for you and how it works against you.
yeah, so if you've got a decision to make and your initial reaction is to go and ask somebody about it, you're externally driven. And if it is to go and Google and find out some data, then you're internally. And people knowing that, it'll help them influence decision going forward.
It does, yeah.
That's
so
useful.
And it helps them. And, like anything, there's extremes of the spectrum and there's people who are somewhere in the middle. It's always the same. And it's useful to know, because it's useful to know when that's going to work against you. So if you're stuck in a really negative thought and you're very internally referenced, that narrative is going to become louder and louder and louder. And it's how do you then use either the way that you take information on, or how can you even bring some external referencing in to help you. Equally, if you're extremely externally referenced and you're getting lots of conflicting information by different people that make it really difficult for you to make a decision, how do you bring that in? How do you bring it back and go, right, I have had some really great things, but they're all conflicting, and I need to focus internally on getting some information that will help me. And it's just different. It's being aware of it and then being aware, again, knowing it and managing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really useful tool for people to use with decision making. So something else I wanted to discuss, I was looking at your website and one of the blogs, and it sort of touched on the importance of working to values, and going back to the time when I sort of felt like I was stuck, and sort of the name of this podcast, like Graft Concept, like Graft was a set of values that I pulled together, being like growth, relationships, adventure, fitness, and teaching. I thought if I apply these to how I sort of go about my life and my situation, I think sort of working to those values is really going to help me stay on the right path and be aligned with what I want to do as an individual. And it's common with like businesses, isn't it? Like they have values to encourage behaviours of people that work there to sort of achieve a common goal. So, what are some of the other important things that you see or think about working to a set of defined values?
Yeah, hugely important. They guide us, don't they? And values come in so early in life. They say that our values are pretty much set by the time we're about the age of 7. And they're different from beliefs. Beliefs, we could change them whenever we want. So when I was doing my NLP training, my mind was blown one day. I used to do weekends, full weekends doing my NLP training. And this one weekend, we'd done a whole session about beliefs. And there was a statement that said, if your beliefs aren't working for you, change them. And I remember going home thinking, oh my God, change them. I thought your beliefs are there forever and they're what you are. And I was like, oh my God, I can change my beliefs. That's incredibly profound. So if I'm believing something and it's not working, then why am I believing it? Believe something else that works better for you. Whereas values are different. Values are something they're pretty much set at a very young age. They're set around our value, our environment, and the way that we're brought up really in that young age. And then there was another element and a time when I realised that it's quite odd to realise your values are just your values. That's it. They're nobody else's values. And that's what sometimes happens, is that we have a value, and because it comes from such an early age, it's so deep and core, unlike a belief, which is something you can change throughout your life, that when actually that values is crossed, it's literally like somebody's proper crossed you because they've crossed your value. But when you realise that people are going to cross your values and you're going to cross other people's values because they're just yours and they will have a different set than you. So they're living to their values and you're living to your values, and clearly you're going to clash. They're going to cross each other. And a bit of story about this is one of my friends who I've known for years and years, and one of my values is very much around kindness, and I sort of display that in care and the way that I try and make people feel cared for when they're with me, either in my team or if they're in my sort of circle. And I was going to meet a friend of mine, and I said, I'll pick you up. I'm picking up from my house. We were going out for the afternoon. It was a beautiful day. We were going to go and drive in the countryside and put the music on and just have this real chilled out driving day in the countryside. And I was on my way to pick her up, and I called in the garage and I thought, oh, my car's filthy. I'm just going to quickly get my car cleaned, pick up a nice cappuccino for us both, pick up a little cake. So in my words, she's got a lovely clean car to get into, driving through the countryside. She's going to have a nice cappuccino. She's going to have a little cake. That's going to make her feel really special, really cared for. Great. She's going to feel great. What that did was make me about 10 minutes, 15 minutes late for picking her up. And I was like, oh, it's okay, 10, 15 minutes isn't much of an issue. It's not like we had to be anywhere for a particular time. And I drove up and I went in to pick her up. I got these coffees in hand thinking she's going to feel brilliant. And she sort of looked at me and I said, sorry I was a bit late. I just popped to get the car clean and pick up these coffees and some cakes. And she looked at me and said, so you thought that getting your car cleaned and picking up some coffees was more of a priority than arriving on time? It sounds quite harsh when you say that, but actually one of her really, really strong values was being on time. When somebody said, if she was coming to pick me up and she said she was coming to my house 1 o'clock, she would have been there for 1 o'clock, because one of her values is, I've said I'll be on time, and that's really important. I stick to my word of being on time. And she was, of course it didn't cause an argument or anything, but suddenly it hit me and I thought, my value of wanting you to feel looked after and special, your value is I turn up on time. That's what makes you feel cared for and special, that I've turned up on time. And it sort of makes you realise how you can very easily and innocently step on somebody else's value because you're coming from a place of your value, not theirs. And I have never been late for her ever again. It's one of my things, like, right, I have to be on time because I know it's important to her. And if I want to satisfy my value of being caring and making her feel special, I've got to take note of what hers is and work to that. So it's realising that your values are only your values. So only you can live by your values. So don't concentrate on trying to live by anybody else's, but also don't expect other people to live by yours. And it's a really, really powerful thing about values, and it's the same when it's organisations. We ask people to work within values of an organisation because the chance that if you recruit somebody with the values of organisation, they're going to feel more comfortable, more happy. You're not going to be treading on their values all the time. They're not going to be treading on yours. But that's all it is. It doesn't make them right or wrong because we've all got different sets of values and they all affect us in different ways. So yeah, it's a really interesting, a couple of lessons I had myself through experiences.
Yeah. Did your friend eat the cake even though you were late?
And it was fine. It was gone in a second. But it was just the fact that, it's something like your intention was good, but it came from your value set. And it's why it's so easy. And it's the time when we get the most triggered. I know when I do this stuff all the time, I suppose, so I should be fairly well versed in understanding myself and managing myself. But I know if I have allowed myself to get really triggered, I almost go, right, come on, it's probably a value, Carolyn, because with all my skills and understanding, that's probably the one thing that might do. What was the value? Why was it? And actually going, that's about you. It's you who's your value and it's the reason why you're triggered, not about what they've done, because what they've done is about them and not about you. And how you're feeling is about you and not about them. So yeah, it's a really insightful way of learning.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Good thing to think about. Definitely, as you sort of work through different relationships and things. So we touched on like leadership earlier, and I just wondered like how you define sort of the difference between a manager and a leader.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting one when people ask you. Because I talk about leadership all the time. I don't really talk about managing. All my topics is really about leadership. And there's a few. I often use a few diagrams or tools to sort of explain it, and it's something called the relationship triangle, if ever anybody wants to go and sort of Google what that is. And the relationship triangle, it starts with, what is at the bottom of that triangle? What's the biggest bit? Because the triangle, the biggest bit is at the bottom, isn't it? And then it gets thinner and thinner and thinner until you get to the top. And at the top, you've got the result. That's the thing that you're trying to reach. That's the top of the mountain. The peak of the mountain is the result that you're trying to achieve. And in order to achieve a result, any sort of outcome, you've got to take some action. If you don't take an action, you're not going to get anything. Under that, if unless you just sort of, blindly plodding through and accidentally get to some sort of action and result, you've usually got a plan. And under your plan, you've got some sort of vision, some possibilities that you want to achieve. And then under that is what I call the true leadership stuff, which is the relationships. So I often say to people, that's where leadership is. It's in that big one, the relationships at the bottom. It's the biggest bit of the triangle for a reason, because it's the part that's going to have the most impact. And as a leader, that's where you should be spending most of your time, in the relationships that you've got, whether it be the relationship with your peers, whether it be with your team, whether it be relationship upwards, whether it be stakeholders, clients, future people that you might want to build relationships to take you where you need to go. And if those relationships aren't built at the bottom, really strong foundation, if they're not big enough to do all the other things on top, then that's when you start to fall down. And so I say to people, leadership are the relationships that you're building at the bottom, and how strong those relationships are, how deep they are, how much can you rely on them at a later time when you need them. And then the second one up, which I talked about, was vision and possibilities. That one is also leadership. You're going, where are we going? What's the art of the possible? What's the strategy? All that stuff. Those two, relationships, vision and possibilities, is the leadership there. Then you can start moving into management, which is the plan and the action that you want to take. That's the stuff you want to do. And then the final one, when you might dip into what I call an operator, because it's leader, manager, operator, is when you've got the actual result. So the people who achieve the actual outcome, the result, are when you're operating, when you're doing the doing. So when leaders aren't doing any of those bottom two, the relationships and the vision and possibilities, they're not leading, they're managing and operating. And that's how I sometimes pick up some leaders. They come to me, and when we look up the things they're actually doing on a daily basis, they're managing and operating they're not leading, and that's why they're stuck and they're not moving forward, and they're firefighting and they're capacity poor and all those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely a completely different skill set, isn't it? And I think the two. I don't. Do you think like is the one that can become the other easier? Is a manager easier to go from a manager to a leader, or a leader to a manager, or do you not think they cross too well?
Yeah, and as a leader, you've got to step into manager and operator. So you can't just be leading all the time. There's times when, you know, even if it's yourself, you're going to have plans and action you need to take yourself, or plans and action that you have to do with your team. So you're going to step into manager. But what I often do is go, one of the exercises that I ask people to do sometimes is get to the end of your week and go, how many times have I been in those bottom two boxes this week? And how much time have I spent in the plan and action stuff? And if they go, well, actually, I've spent a fair amount of time. I've probably spent 50% of my time in building relationships. That might be conversations I'm having, things I'm doing to understand other people, meetings that I might have been in when I'm interacting with other people, thinking about the future strategies, building external relationships with stakeholders, all those things. You go, yeah, I've spent probably 50% of my time in there. That's great. And then I've spent another 30% of my time planning, taking action, getting things that needed to be done, doing some of the doing. And that's fine. That's okay. But if they go, do you know, I spent no time in the bottom two boxes, well, you've not spent any time leading this week, which is, you might have had a particular hellish week, but was that your intention? And equally, if you look ahead at your next week and you go, how much time am I in those bottom two boxes? How much time am I in relationships, vision and possibilities and strategy, and how much time am I in planning and action? That already before I start, you know, the percentage is weighted far too much one way. Okay, change that now. Let's look at why that is. And some of it also comes down to what I said at the very beginning about people struggling to let go of what they were great at and going, well, I know what I need to do here. I'll put myself in to do that, and I'll do it because I know it needs doing, as opposed to going, what is my role, or what is my new role if they've stepped into a new role and it's more of a leadership role. And yes, I think past managers make great leaders. They've got to realise that then it's now a different thing. That's the difference.
Yeah. So we've spoken quite a lot from like an individual perspective. I think like most of the conversations sort of revolved around that. But from like an organisational view, what can organisations do to enable great leadership within their businesses?
So I'd like to say that it probably comes from the top. So it comes from the CEO or the MD or the founder or whatever title that person's got. If they are leading, because they should be the ones spending most of their time leading. You know, if you're going to split percentages out, they should be the ones spending most of the time in relationships, vision, possibility, strategy. And then, you know, allowing also their leaders below them to do it. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes that MD or that CEO is an incredible entrepreneur, a great risk taker, or whatever it is, and they might not necessarily be a great leader. So they need to then get great leaders around them. So if they've got a senior leadership team or an executive team, they should be then making sure that the people they're bringing into their business are great leaders already and can come and take that up for them. What leadership does, it gets everybody doing the thing that they're best at. That's what I say. So if your position is a senior leadership position, you should be leading your people. You should be spending time with them, understanding them, giving them direction, encouragement, enabling them, empowering them, removing obstacles, listening to them, noticing when things are not happening that you need to put right and you need to change. That's a big chunk of time that you need to be spending with your people. If your head's down, doing things, doing the doing, in the weeds, you're not doing any of that. You're not leading. Who is leading? Your people are stressed. Your people are doing things that are not useful, not helpful, that are not helping themselves, not helping the business, not helping the clients. So it's just this chaotic thing going on. If you're leading well and at least spending half your time doing that, then your people are getting what they need. They're getting the tools to do the work. They're getting their knowledge. They're getting their information. They're getting their direction. They're getting their support. They're getting great processes that make sure things are efficient and effective. They're not stressed. They're enjoying what they're doing. They're not leaving, so you're not having to start all over again. That is what, for me, a great leadership does. That's what a great organisation does. The ones that don't do that are in this cycle of chaos. But it doesn't take long to actually fix that. You start with that senior leadership team, and once you've got them leading properly, everything else can change quite rapidly. And I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen in teams. I've seen really poor teams become incredible teams by changing the leader or changing the ability of the leader. So it might be that a new leader comes in who's got all that, or you might be work with that leader and they gain that. And you see a team which is almost written off as a poor team, where you think, we'll go and change that team and get a new team in, but they'll be the same because it's got the same structure above it. And I've seen a really poor team keep the same people and become a really high performing team in a very short space of time. And it's not a complicated thing to do. So in terms of what should they do, get your senior leadership team to be a team that's leading and leads really, really well.
Yeah, it's still, even at like organisation, it's always coming back to individuals, isn't it?
And it doesn't, I often say, change the person or change the person, wherever you want to be. So either change the person in the sense of you help them to gain the skills and knowledge that they need, or you change them and go out and get somebody else who can come in and do it. And another thing you often see is you see people not make that decision. You've got somebody who you know isn't leading properly, and they see the pain of that below that person, which is the real horrific thing. That's the thing that's really a massive mission of mine, the pain that happens below a poor leader. And because of that one person that they don't want to upset, they don't change that person, whether it be help to change their behaviour or physically change it to a different person. And below that, they've got all the pain that is causing. And I find that really, I guess that's really concerning that you make that decision. I understand why it happens and why they make that decision. And that's parcel of what I do, is trying to help them make that difficult decision to help that person or change that person.
Yeah, I guess that's really rewarding when you see it come through, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
there's some belief behind it as well, really. Belief. Sometimes they don't believe that can happen, and I guess when you bring somebody along, that external reference, which we talked about, who goes, trust me, I've seen it happen so many times, I've done it myself, follow this and we'll get there. So bringing that external reference point in can be what they need to make that really difficult decision.
Right. So if someone's listening to this and they have perhaps identified that they are at a point in their career where they'd like to pursue an avenue to sort of get more of a leadership role, or sort of develop some of these skills, what's a really good starting point for them? Is there like sort of 3 top tips that you could give to sort of somebody who's looking to become a better leader, or start a journey towards becoming a leader?
Yeah, I guess some of the stuff is learn from others, model yourself on others, but don't try and be others. And when we start modelling, that's how we learn from, the moment we open our eyes. We're modelling all the time, we're copying all the time. So model yourself and learn from. I've worked with some amazing leaders that I've definitely modelled myself on, and seen them do something and go, God, I've seen the impact, I've seen the really brilliant, that's a way that I'm going to be, or something that I'm going to use. But don't try and be them. And there's some things I would sort of say about that, is that you've got your own brand, and your brand is your superpower, and you need to find your own brand. And once you've found it and you've created it, then that's what you're going out there to show everybody when you're wanting to go for that next step in life, and that's it. You want to show your brand and show what you're brilliant at. It's like a brand, any big company, a Nike or a Coca-Cola, they've got their brand, and when they go out, they go, look, this is who I am. Come, buy me, work with me, whatever it is you want to do. So that's what you're wanting to do, is craft your brand. Yes, model some of what you do on other people, but really get to know what that is. Again, there's some exercises that I do that helps people to find what that is and know exactly what it is, and how to show that other people every time they interact with them. Also, I would say you're not going to get it right, probably half the time. You will make mistakes every single day. I make mistakes every single day. The teams that I used to lead made mistakes, and I used to say to them, well, wonder how many mistakes we're going to make today. Because you just will. You make mistakes all day long. We do it at home. Why wouldn't we do it within our professional life? It's fine, because providing you can do something to sort that mistake out so that it isn't going to have particularly lengthy impacts on you or somebody else, then it's fine. It's just a mistake. And also, keep being curious about yourself in particular, but curious about everybody. I don't know, insatiable appetite of curiosity. I whenever I'm in a situation and I'm with somebody, I was thinking, oh, I wonder what was behind why they said that. I wonder what was behind why they behaved that way. And then I'll ask a question, and they'll give me a little bit of information. Like, oh, right, okay, I understand why they thought that or said that or did that. There's always more information to gain. You call it just having a conversation, and particularly about what you do. We talked about just having a conversation today. But every time you ask a question, you'll get a little bit more information. So I would say to somebody going on that career, be hugely curious, ask questions. Or if ever there's a little thing in your head that goes, I wonder why, ask a question. That's a trigger to ask a question. And the other one, which I think is really, be 100% yourself. I guess it's the best chance you've got of being the best at anything in life, is being yourself, because nobody could be better at being you than you. So be 100% yourself, and just concentrate on being that best. I say the saying is best version of yourself, and then everything else will probably work out well from there.
Yeah, I made some notes there. But to summarise, so 5 really strong ones there. So modelling good behaviours, crafting or identifying a brand, accepting mistakes or embracing failure, pursuing curiosity, and being yourself and authentic. I think that's 5 really good tips people can take away from this to pursue some growth and work towards becoming a better leader. Yeah. Look, I'm curious of time, Carolyn. I think we've covered some amazing stuff there. It's been a really good conversation. Is there anything you think that we've missed or you wanted to cover off?
No, it's been a great conversation, Chris. I really appreciate you you allowing me the time to come on, and I've enjoyed the conversation, and it'd be lovely to speak again at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure that people listening to this will be interested to sort of find out where they can either get in touch or follow along with what you're doing. Where's the best place for them to find you?
So my website is www.seethesolution.co.uk. If they want to go on there and they can have a little bit of a listen to me. I'm on LinkedIn as Carolyn Tipper as well, if they want to go and find me on there. So yeah, come and have a look, see whether this stuff I'm putting on there all the time, particularly LinkedIn, which hopefully will be useful for people as well. So if they do follow me, hopefully they'll pick up little bits and tips and things that might be helpful.
Yeah, I could advocate for that. I've seen a few bits come across my profile recently that I found useful, little tips and tricks. So yeah, thanks for sharing those. Well, Carolyn, yeah, it's been great to chat. Thank you so much for giving up the time and giving us those valuable insights. For everyone listening, thank you for joining. If you've enjoyed this, perhaps you could share it with somebody. There's a lot of value here. I'm sure everyone has got something that they're either looking to develop in terms of leadership, whether it's on a personal level or career. So share this with a friend, like or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thanks very much for listening, and catch up soon.